Happy coding.
Hey there, and welcome to our next video in our series on Intro to Web Dev. In this video, we're going to learn about a library framework called Bootstrap, which lets you make sort of, I don't know, realistic looking websites, or like websites that have a like kind of reasonable default styling. So to talk about that, I'll just kind of quickly review a couple of the concepts from the past couple weeks, where we have learned about CSS, which lets you style your code. We've learned about JavaScript, which lets you make your page interactive. I should have said CSS lets you style your page, not your code. So CSS lets you style your content, JavaScript lets you make that content interactive. And then last week we learned about JavaScript libraries, which let you use code that other people wrote. And so this week we're going to kind of combine those ideas to learn about Bootstrap. So the best way I know how to do this, like always, is to just kind of dive in. So I'm going to go to NeoCities. I'm in a Scratch directory like I always am, just to have a place to write some code. I've got an index.html file and a styles.css file and a script.js file. We'll see if I actually need that one. But right now I have some HTML that doesn't contain a ton of content here. I've got like a container div here. I have a div inside of that one, which is a class of card. I've got another div with class card body, and then an h1 with a class of card title, p class, card text, and then a button here with a class of button. However, in my CSS, which I am loading in my HTML file here, I haven't actually styled any of those classes. I've only styled the body and the container. So if I go to my page, it currently looks like this, where the h1 and the p tag and the button are unstyled. And so let me just kind of rearrange my windows a little bit, so that I can quickly go back and forth. And sure. And I'll move this to the right so that I can quickly kind of edit and refresh. Okay, so I'm just kind of getting my Scratch directory and my code up and running. So, this is where I'm going to start. So if you want to catch up, this is the code that I currently have. So you can, like, I don't know, pause and write this if you want to, or you can just kind of follow along. So the next thing I could start doing from this starting point is I could start styling these classes. So I've written some HTML and I could start styling that. So if I go over here and I say dot card maybe, and I'll give that a border of, I don't know, thin and dark here. So if I hit refresh, I do see that. So that's kind of there. It's kind of hard to see, but it is indeed there. Um, and next I could kind of add like maybe some padding to offset the text, and sure, maybe padding of, I don't know, I always like 25 as a default number for everything. Um, so okay, and I don't know, maybe I want like the card title to be like have like its own little section maybe. So I don't know, I could do that like dot card title, maybe like I don't know, background color of light gray, something like that, and obsess over white space and refresh. And maybe I think I would probably want that to fill the top part, so I could keep fiddling. Let's say I wanted this button to be like, I don't know, maybe a different color, maybe a little bigger, so I could style that. Maybe give it like a background color of like blue. Maybe refresh, and okay, I kind of don't like that because I kind of want to have that dark text be lighter now. And you kind of see this process where I'm going back and forth and I'm fiddling with my CSS, and things are like, changing, but like, is this getting closer to what I would consider like a reasonable looking website, like the kind of website where, if I'm just going around the internet, I would say, oh, this is a normal website versus like this is a website that someone threw together. And I really don't mean that as like a value judgment. In fact, sometimes I personally love websites that like a random person threw together. But if I'm making a website like for a business or like a portfolio website or stuff that I really want other people to kind of take seriously, then I am generally trying pretty hard to sort of conform to the kind of expectations that people have about a website. So it's kind of subtle, but like things like, I don't know, this button, you can just kind of look at it and tell that like it just looks kind of weird, right? It doesn't look like a reasonable looking button. And so I could keep going back and forth with my CSS and keep changing it and like fiddling with it. And you have likely done that if you're not using ChatGPT. Uh, and you've likely fiddled with it and have like played with different colors and different like margins and padding to try to get it to look the way that you want it to look. And sometimes that can be fun, but sometimes it can be tedious. And sometimes you just want a reasonable default. So this gets back to the idea that we were talking about last week, which is the idea of libraries. And I keep saying like I I just want a reasonable default. And so the thought that I come back to is like, wouldn't it be nice if somebody else already came up with some reasonable defaults? And well, spoiler alert, somebody did. They are called Bootstrap. So I just got rid of my CSS here. So I'm going to refresh and sort of go back to the empty styling. And so now my HTML is still here, but I don't have any like styling for any of these divs here. And so we have talked about the idea of a library, which is just some code that other people wrote. And there's many, many, many libraries. Last week we looked at a library called Sweet Alert, which is a library that lets you show alert dialogues. And we looked at P5.js, which is a library that lets you like draw different sketches and animations and sort of digital art and things like that. Bootstrap is another library. So let me just go to a search engine and I'll just type in Bootstrap. And, in the results, I'll see, some examples, and here's W3 schools. I'll say Bootstrap 3 is pretty old, so I won't click that one, but this first example is what I want. Get bootstrap.com, Bootstrap, and they say that they are the most popular HTML, CSS, and JavaScript library in the world, and I think they might be right. At least they have been for the last like 15 years or so. So this is a very popular library, and what we do to start is exactly what we were doing last week, where we're looking for like, how do I load this library? So here it is. It's actually 2 lines of code because it's not just a JavaScript library. It's also a CSS library, which just means that it's a bunch of CSS that other people wrote. So I need these 2 lines of code. So I'll copy them now. So I'll copy that and copy that into my index.html file. And I'll copy that into my index.html file. And that might look really scary, but it's only because they have this like integrity equals thing. And for us, we don't really need that, honestly. So I'm going to get rid of it. It won't hurt anything if you leave it, but just so that I can kind of look at it this way. It's 2 lines of code that load a CSS file exactly like we were already loading our own CSS files, and a script tag that loads a JavaScript file exactly like we were loading our own JavaScript files. So we are loading the Bootstrap library, which is a CSS file, and a JavaScript file. And so I I haven't changed anything else. I haven't changed my HTML. I have not changed my CSS. My CSS only contains styles for the body and the container itself. And that's it. I don't have any styles for any of those other things. But let me refresh over here. And ooh, all of a sudden, there are styles. And it looks, I chose kind of simplistic content here, but like that's not a bad looking button. That's not a bad looking card kind of widget here. The font is not bad, it's kind of works together in a reasonable way. And how did that work? How did I do that? And the answer is that Bootstrap gives you a bunch of CSS classes that they have styled for you. And so if you look at the HTML that I started with, this like card and card body and card title, card text, button primary, I didn't choose those randomly. I chose them ahead of time because I knew what Bootstrap classes were available to me. So if I don't know that ahead of time, the other thing that you look for when you are starting to use a library is documentation. So here, let's see. This homepage looks like it's mostly like getting started, maybe like just an explanation of what the whole thing is. But I'm going to go up here to docs here in the upper left. And here it is. Here is some documentation on how to use Bootstrap. Starts with like create an index.html file, load the CSS and JavaScript, and here they are. Here's the links, and then some next steps. And the next steps are to look at some components that they offer. So similar to when we were using P5.js, I said, and here's the reference, look for functions that do stuff that you want to do. With Bootstrap, they organize things into concepts called components. And so if I look here on the left nav, if I go down here to components, let me go to the card component. And you can read more about it. Cards are Bootstrap's way of providing a flexible content container with variants and options. Sure, but it looks like this. You can have images in them. It's like, here's a title, some text, maybe a button, and here's the code for it. And, they've got some extra stuff like that image, but here it is. Class equals card, card title, card text, and maybe a button. And I can get way more involved. I can add like links to them, and that's what that would look like with card link instead of button. Here's how I can use an image, and so on and so forth. And so I could take this code and add it to my HTML file, and it would just kind of work because I'm using Bootstrap. So let me come up with, I don't know, maybe a different example. Maybe I'll just go to an accordion because it's up at the top. And like, what even is an accordion? Well, it's this. Looks like it's like items that are kind of stacked on top of each other, and you can click them and like notice that there's sort of an animation when they open, and maybe some like styling where it like kind of like, I don't know, gets highlighted in a smooth way and then opens in a smooth way. And cool, okay. So how do I use that? Well, I look at this code, and I try to skim through it at least to understand how it's working. And that's why I've like harped on like, please make sure you understand the code that you're working with, because if you've just been using like ChatGPT this whole time and you've just been copy pasting code, it's going to be really hard to like integrate code into your own code. And so what I'm doing is starting out by like just reading through it, and I'm seeing like, okay, there's a div with a class of accordion. Inside of that looks like there's accordion items. So like one accordion item, another accordion item. Okay, so then I'm looking like at the accordion item itself, and looks like that has maybe like an h2 with a class of accordion header. Okay. Looks like they have like maybe IDs that um, kind of correspond to each other. Okay, I'm kind of looking at that. And a bunch of other classes that are Bootstrap classes, and then maybe some more content here. So what I'm going to start doing is I'm just going to maybe copy this whole thing in. Maybe I should only do like one item at a time, but whatever. I want to start by copying all of this in. And I want to copy that into my HTML file. And maybe I'll put it like after my card. So where's my card? My card ends here. So I'm going to copy that whole mess in. And it's going to look like a ton of code at first. And, maybe it is. But because I've like skimmed it and I kind of understand how it works, I'm going to be able to like get in there and change what I need to. So first, let me just save this and refresh and like double check that it kind of does what I expect. And okay, I've got accordion item 1, item 2, item 3. Okay, cool. So then let me kind of get in here and kind of search for like what I want to change. So maybe here, I don't know, I haven't really thought of this ahead of time, so I'll do like lions, and I'll say like in here, in this accordion body, I'll say like lions are the king of the jungle. Is that right, or is that tigers? No, lions are, right? Refresh, and here I've got lions, and okay, so now I've got lions is collapsible, and my content is just like what I've added. Maybe here, instead of accordion item number 2, I'll have like tigers. And then instead of this whole mess, I will have like, I don't know, tigers have stripes. Sure. And I'll refresh. And now I've got lions, tigers have stripes. And finally down here, I'll do bears. And I don't know what to say about bears, so I will just say, oh my. Sure. So save, refresh. And now I have lions, and I can expand tigers have stripes, bears, oh my. And see that the like I didn't have to spend a ton of time on the styling or the interactivity. So there's interactivity, which is coming from JavaScript. When I click this section here, it expands to show the content underneath there. And the actual mechanisms of that, like I don't really need to worry about. I can kind of imagine that Bootstrap added like a click handler here, and then in the JavaScript for that click handler, it looked at like document.get element by ID, probably using this attribute, so collapse 1, and then probably set its visibility to true. I can probably imagine how it worked. And in fact, I could write all of that myself. But, why? If I don't have to, why would I? There are answers to that question I'll get to towards the end of this video, but imagine how long this would have taken us to code like just by ourselves. We probably, I could spend an hour on this easily. And instead I got it working in, 2 minutes. So that's one of the real benefits of Bootstrap. So I don't know, maybe just to show sort of like, I don't know, maybe how this is working a little tiny bit. What I'm going to do is I'm going to just take out Bootstrap. So I'm going to delete this, and I'm going to save, and I'm going to refresh. And here's what it looks like without Bootstrap. I've got my card stuff here, welcome, I've got a submit, and then here's my button, which I created where here. So in my HTML, I have this button with, some attributes and stuff, but really the only text is lions. And by default, lions is just going to be a button. And when I click it, nothing will happen. Because I have not added an on-click attribute. I haven't really done anything with it. And then I have, some text that's in a div maybe, but not styled, and so on and so forth. So this is the content without Bootstrap. But when I add Bootstrap back in, let me just Control Z, save that, and refresh. That's where the magic comes in. And so I can start to get a sense of how that works by like, I don't know, inspecting the page. So if I inspect and sure, if I look at, I don't know, like, um, if I look at, what do I want to look at? I want to look at accordion item maybe. And then inside of that, there's this H2. And can you see this? Let's see. Maybe if I make this bigger. In the H2, here's a bunch of styles. And like I didn't have to write any of these styles. Here's like some animations looks like, and that's what's like animating it as it pops open and closes. And like, look how much CSS this is. And you know, I could write this. We could write this. It's not anything that we haven't seen before. It's things like margin top, line height, stuff like that, and like font size. And we could set all of that, but the folks who created Bootstrap did it for us. Um, okay, so that's kind of the power of Bootstrap. Maybe I'll show like one more component, and that's the nav bar component, just because it's such a popular thing that folks want to do. So if I want to do something in Bootstrap, the process for that is to look at their docs. So I'm going to pull up their docs and like kind of just look through it and like click through and try to figure out like what each thing does and like, well, does this help me? Does this get me closer to what I want or not? And in this case, I'm kind of looking for a nav bar so I can read all about it. Um, and here's like a really complicated example with like a search bar. I mean, the search bar won't work by default because you need something to hook that up to, but like, you know, here's like a drop down, but the code for that is huge and like I don't want to copy paste that whole thing in. So let me look for like a smaller example, maybe. Yeah, this one's a little smaller, sure. And so I'm reading through the page to like get a sense of how it's working and like, you know, I'm not doing it on the video, but like if I were you, I would like read through all of this to learn like how does this like component work. But for now, maybe I'll just steal this code. Um, so navs or like, is this smaller? This is even smaller. Yeah, let me steal this code. Um, so I'm going to steal that and I'm going to go to my index. And in this case, maybe I'll put it right inside my container, sort of above my card because it's a nav bar. So is that aligned? Sure. And then I'm going to go through here and I'm just going to kind of look at it. So I've got nav bar. Maybe here I'll say like my site. Actually, maybe first I'll just save and refresh and see what it looks like by default. So, okay, I've got a nav bar and sort of out of the box, Bootstrap is giving me a behavior where depending on the size of the page, it collapses into a like drop down menu. So that's kind of cool. I am going to take away one of the styles that I have added actually because it's kind of bothering me. So I want to take away, actually I want to take away all of these styles for now. Yeah, we're gonna see what happens. If I refresh, let's see what happens. If I Control Shift R refresh, let's see what happens. Yeah, there we go. And okay, so I've gotten rid of my custom container styles, and I'll maybe come back to that in a second. But now I'm just using like the default styles. So, or not the default styles, Bootstrap's default styles. And so I do have my nav bar. It's up there, and you can kind of squint and see like, yeah, this is kind of reasonable. You know, I'm throwing placeholder text at it just because you know it's a tutorial, but you could imagine using this for real content. So let me go back to my nav bar and edit it. So I've got instead of nav bar, maybe like my site. And instead of my links, maybe I'll have like home. I don't really want a disabled link because, you know, I don't care about that example. So maybe I'll say like home, I don't know, about, and I don't know, images, maybe. Again, just an example. And if I refresh and maybe expand, so now I've got my site, home, about, and images. These don't actually go anywhere. I could make them go somewhere by setting the href of the links. So if I had multiple pages, that's where I would do that. But for now, they just point to like the same page I'm already on. But that doesn't really matter. It's the styling that matters, and um, the sort of the like default styling in Bootstrap is like pretty reasonable. Like that's a pretty reasonable nav bar. It's got this behavior where I can like do the drop down, and you can imagine if I was on like a phone, that would come in handy. Or if I have a bigger screen, then I can set it that way. And I can further customize it, but I'm not going to for now. um, okay, so that's Bootstrap components, and you could click through and look at a bunch of different ones. But I won't do that in the video. But I will sort of pivot over to another concept in Bootstrap, and that is how they do layouts. So um, we learned about Flexbox a few weeks ago, and I could continue using Flexbox. I could style my own like this content with Flexbox, and like set how big I want stuff to be and like the spacing and whatnot. But again, very similarly, you've likely spent some time fiddling with Flexbox yourself and like finding exactly the right property and all that good stuff. Um, but what if you don't have to? What if someone already did it for you? If I go up here to layout here, I'm going to start by clicking containers. And in Bootstrap, there is a class container. And, it's no coincidence that I started out by specifying container. I usually do that in my own code anyway, but Bootstrap styles a class called container. And so if I actually look at my page now, in my CSS, I took away my container styles. But if I think about what this page is doing, if I like resize the window, um, kind of notice the content and the margins of that content. So like pay attention to like this section right here in the middle. And as I resize it, my container is staying the same width. It's kind of shifting in the margins, but it's staying the same width. But if I get bigger, then it snaps. And I'm sort of like right at a break point. So if I get bigger here, notice that like it's kind of hard to tell because the whole page is getting bigger, but it's really the margins that are increasing in size, not the actual container. But if I get smaller, then the container snaps to a different size, and then it stays at a certain size for a while until I reach a different breakpoint, and then it snaps to a different size. And so there's a few of these. And so as I get bigger, the container is like snapping to a predefined set of sizes. And where do those come from? Well, they come from Bootstrap. And so that's what this is saying here. This whole table looks a little confusing, but really we only care for now about this first row here. So what this is saying is if your window, your whole browser is less than 576 pixels, then the container is 100% of the width. And so that means if I make this really small, actually maybe I have to open up my developer tools to even let myself get that small. I don't know, it's because no, I guess that is, yeah, so there I'm at 500 pixels. I can see in the upper right corner, it tells me. So I'm less than 576 pixels, and so it's taking up 100% of what I give it. And I bet there's like margins like on that, but it's snapped to 100% until I get bigger than 576. So let's see where that goes. That's right about there. And so there's your first breakpoint. So I go from taking up 100% of the width to taking up 540 pixels. And so as I increase to above 576, my container will snap to 540. There it is. And then it'll stay at 540 until I reach 768. And at 768, it'll snap to 720. And so let's look at that. that's up here, 728. Wait, where's that? Wait, 768, sorry. If I go to 768, that's here-ish. I'm about to cross it. It gets a little bigger and it snaps to 720 and so on and so forth. As I get bigger, it snaps to these predefined numbers. And I'll come back to those numbers in a second because they get really important. But that's the default styling of Bootstrap's container class. You can do other stuff by reading more, but for now, just keep in mind that Bootstrap snaps to these predefined widths. So the next thing I'll talk about is grid. So it's another concept in Bootstrap's layout system, and it does use Flexbox behind the scenes, but you kind of don't have to worry about all the Flexbox details. And instead, you just need to know that Bootstrap splits the page up into conceptually rows and then columns inside those rows. And so, yeah, maybe I'll just do it this way. I'll copy this for now, and I'll put that in my HTML page. And I'll put that, I don't know, maybe I'm running out of places to put it. Maybe I'll put it right at the bottom. And sure, so I'll save that and refresh it, and there we go. And it's not very exciting, but you see column. Oh, you can't see that because of my dumb face. Let's turn my face off for a second. You see column and column and column. Again, not super exciting, but what this means is as I make my window bigger and Bootstrap sort of snaps to different widths, my columns stay sort of equally spaced out just by default here. And, you know, that works, but it gets more interesting than that because Bootstrap divides the page into what are called template columns. And that might sound confusing, but it just means that Bootstrap divides the page up into 12 sort of columns. And so let's see, if I look at an example here, I can tell Bootstrap like how many of those imaginary columns should a thing take up. And so, for example, I'm looking for one that actually does what I'm trying to do here. If I tell Bootstrap that I want something to take up 6 of the imaginary columns, then that thing will be roughly half of the size of the page. And so let's try this. Let's just try. I'm going to add a row, and yeah, where am I going to add a row? I'm going to add a row around my maybe around my card. So I'm going to add a div with a class of row because that's a thing that Bootstrap knows about. That's a class that Bootstrap styles. And I'll close out my div here, /div. And let's just see what that does just by default. I don't know if it'll change much of anything. Okay, it just takes up 100%. Cool. And what do I want to do next? I want to add a column. So sure, I think what I'll do is I'll add a div of column 6. So back in my HTML, inside of my row, I will add my div with a class of col6. And then I need to, let's see, indent my card and then close out my row, or my column, I mean. Div, so this matches that. Okay, that matches my column. Okay, so I've told Bootstrap that within this row, there's a single thing that takes up 6 of those like imaginary columns. And so if I go back to my site and I refresh, now my card takes up half of my my available width. And I could actually collapse this into one. Maybe I should have done that. I could move this down here and say card call 6. You know, it's fine, I guess. But let's say I wanted to center that. There's probably a few ways I could do it. In fact, it probably tells me on this page how to do that. Um, but, you know, just to kind of demonstrate it, what I'll do is I'll add another div over here, div class equals call, and then I'll just close that out. It'll be an empty div by default, and then I'll add another one after this div down here. And what I've got is now in this row, I have 3 things. The first one takes up a generic amount of space. I just say call. The second one takes up 6 of those virtual columns. And then the third one is another one of those like, just, you know, however much room you want. So if I refresh now I see that it is centered because I'm saying this empty div over here, just however many columns are available. Same with over here on the right, but this one takes up 6. And so it's going to figure out that based on this 6 and the fact that these are just kind of generic, these are going to be 3. So it's 3, 6, 3 virtual columns. And that might sound super duper confusing, but let me change this around a little bit. Maybe this is what I should have done from the very beginning. What I'm going to do is I'm going to change how I did this. So I'm going to remove that outer class and some of these extra calls. Yeah. And I'm going to add the class there. So I have my whole card is going to take up 6 virtual columns, and then I'm going to move my whole accordion into my row by just moving this closing div. Wait, where do you close? Yeah, that closing div. Down to the bottom. And sure. And you need to go in a little. Okay. And then the last thing I'll do is for my accordion, I'll say call, I don't know, 4. And so I'll go back here and refresh. And now what I see is my card takes up 6 sort of virtual columns. So it's sort of 6 units wide of the total 12. And then my accordion is 4 units wide of the total 12. And then there's sort of spacing around. So I could add those empty divs back, sort of here maybe. I'll add it like in the middle, class equals call, and close out that div. So now I have my div, which is a card, call 6, div class, which is accordion, call 4, and then just a normal old call in the middle, which is going to say this should take up 6, this should take up 4, and this should take up the rest, which in this case is going to be 2. So if I refresh again over here, now that 2 is in the middle. So like, where do these numbers come from? Why does this make sense? And the thing to notice is like, as I make my site bigger, the dimensions kind of stay, they keep working. So no matter how big my screen is, the fact that this takes up 6 and this takes up 4 stays true because the 12 is kind of imaginary. It's not literally 12 columns of a specific size. It's like 6 out of 12 units of the available space is how much this takes up. And the reason for that is way back however many minutes ago when we started talking about containers, and I said the Bootstrap container class snaps to these sizes. The magic here is that each of these sizes is evenly divisible by 12. And so if I look at small, 540 divided by 12 is 45. So on the smallest screens, 1 unit will be 45 pixels wide. If I go up to like greater than 768, then it snaps to 720. And 720 divided by 12 is 60. So at that size, 1 unit is 60 pixels wide. And so if I say this is 6 units or columns wide, then it's 6 times 60, which is 360. So if I look at this, it's going to be 360 pixels wide. And if I look at this, it's going to be 4 times 60, which is 240. Um, and that's going to work at every snapping point because these numbers are easily divisible by 12. So 960 divided by 12 is 80, and so on and so forth. Okay, that was probably pretty confusing, but the idea is that a container is always snapped to a size that is divisible by 12, which makes it sort of easier to think about your grid because Bootstrap gives you 12 units in that grid to play with. And by using the col dash and then a number, so col dash 2, col dash 5, col dash 6, col dash 8, you can specify this item within this row should take up this many columns. So you can have things like this, and you can add empty divs if you want to take up, the white space and whatnot. Okay, so this is kind of annoying me, this column here, so I'm gonna maybe get rid of that while I'm staring at it. So that was just this placeholder. The next couple things I'm going to talk through are like how you start to customize CSS or customize Bootstrap. So I have this sort of, this default kind of styling on my page, and I have already customized it a little bit just by giving it a background color. So that's already in my CSS. So cool. Other ways that I can customize it are, exactly how I've always done it. Like this is still HTML and CSS and JavaScript. And so, for example, I don't know, let's say I wanted to add like some space in between my nav bar and my content here. So a few ways I can do that, but I see here that I have nav class equals nav bar. So let me go to my CSS and style that class dot navbar, maybe give it a margin bottom. So margin bottom of, I don't know, 25 pixels is always my default. And then I kind of mess with it. So if I refresh, if I Control Shift R refresh, there it is. Now I have sort of my top navbar has a margin. I could do things like add another div maybe. So I have my div container. That's sort of the whole thing. Maybe I'll add a container. Maybe I'll just style row. There's a few ways to do this. Sure, I'll style row and I'll give row a different class. Actually, I do this one. I'll call this one first row. So I'm adding a class that I can then style. So I'll say dot first row, and maybe I want this to have a background color of, I don't know. I chose this to be like kind of light blue, so maybe I'll make this one light green. So like I'm going to give it an RGB hex of RGB, and I'll just see what that looks like. It's gonna be like a light red, like pinkish color, and yeah, it's right there. I don't love it. It's kind of gross styling, but maybe. So I don't know. I could play with it, but the idea is like I can customize it if I want to. Maybe I will take it away because I don't love it. So I'll save it, refresh. But I could style that. I could also do things like maybe add an on-click attribute to this button. I still have control over stuff. So here's my button. So I'll say like on click equals, I don't know, say hello. And then over in my script.js file, I wasn't sure if I would need this, but over here, I'll define a function. Function, say hello. And for now, I'll just say alert hello. That's super small, but there's my beautiful JavaScript code. And now if I go back here, refresh and submit, Control Shift R refresh, submit. there I see it. Hello. And, even though I'm using Bootstrap, I can still add my own code sort of either in the CSS or the HTML or the JavaScript. I can also, have like my own content and whatnot, but we've already sort of seen that with using these components and whatnot. Um, okay, so finally, another way that I can start to customize Bootstrap is with what's called themes. So I'm going to go to a search engine, just type in like Bootstrap themes, and look at the results. And yeah, this one, Bootswatch, is really good. You can peruse a bunch if you want to, but I'm just going to go here for now. And cool, it's got free themes for Bootstrap, and great. And it looks like, there's a bunch of options. You can kind of preview them. So, like, what's this one look like? Takes you to a website where instead of the sort of default styles that Bootstrap gives you, it's, alternatives. And so this is a different CSS file that styles the same classes with different styles to make them look, like this kind of, I don't know, look like cool, like 3D looking thing. Um, so you can peruse a bunch and see which one you like. And once you find one, you can, there's a couple step process. There's a few ways to do this, but for now, I think I'll just hit download. And that's going to download a file. Cool. It's in my downloads file or downloads directory. And then in my NeoCities directory here, I'm going to hit upload, and I'm going to go to my downloads and go to that file and upload that. So there we go. And okay, I could look at it. Because it's a minified file, it's going to be super ugly. But no, that's the wrong file. Here. It's very ugly because it's minified, which we talked about last time. You can look at it unminified if you want to. Let's do that real quick. So just open that in a new tab. Sure. So this is, by default, what that file looks like. It's, you know, it's CSS. So you see here, like here's container styled with some like padding right, padding left, margins, and you can read through it if you really want to. But part of the beauty of Bootstrap is you don't really need to. And once I have that, I'm actually going to rename it to like Bootstrap Cyborg, just so I know like what the theme was, because that's the one I downloaded from over here. So that's the name of my file, bootstrap-cyborg.min.css. And once I have that in my index.html file, where I was loading the Bootstrap CSS, I'm going to change that to the one I just downloaded, bootstrap cyborg.min.css. Save that, and ready. Drum roll, please. Refresh. And ooh, look at that. Sort of by default, the styles are a little black, and it's a little goofy because my background, the one that I customize, is the one that's like throwing this whole thing off. So let's change that maybe if I want to be annoying. Maybe I'll just get rid of the styling for my background because maybe I don't want to customize it that way anymore. So now if I refresh, there we go. That's a little better. And there it is. Sort of a dark theme with other sort of default styling, and I didn't have to code any of that. I didn't have to code any CSS or JavaScript other than my little function for my button. And that's sort of the power of Bootstrap, and in this case, Bootstrap themes, is you get sort of these default stylings and default behaviors, default components by default, without coding it yourself. And that gets at the last thing that I'll chat through, which is I don't know, the philosophical questions that Bootstrap raises. And what I mean by that sounds a little grandiose, but um, I've been saying this whole time that like Bootstrap gives you some defaults, and why wouldn't you use them? And the answer is a little subtle, and I think it comes down to trade-offs. You can write your own code from scratch, and that will work. It will mean that all of the code is entirely under your control. And if you want to customize something, you can modify the underlying HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and that will work. But if you're going through Bootstrap, if you're using Bootstrap, then you are coding in HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, but you're coding through Bootstrap. And so to modify how something looks or behaves, you have to first understand Bootstrap and then kind of fiddle with how Bootstrap does things. And so, for example, that whole grid system with the virtual columns, on one hand, it gives you, a nice way to lay out your components that works on pretty much any screen size and looks, pretty reasonable. On the other hand, it's another thing that you have to learn. And um, you're also sort of limited to working within the confines of what the library gives you. And so it's not like a right or wrong. It's not better or worse, but it is a trade-off. And it's a trade-off that web developers make all the time. Like, is this something I want to code myself? Is this something I get from a library? And I'll say this gets at, I don't know, maybe some more modern questions around AI and whatnot. And so, like, you can get HTML and JavaScript and CSS from ChatGPT, but it comes at the cost of not really, customizing yourself or maybe even understanding it. And that's a question that the industry is asking right now. Um, and so Bootstrap becomes a choice. It becomes, do you want to use it or not? This week, it's not a choice because that's the homework. It's to use Bootstrap. But as you get into more web development on your own, like if you want to create a website for, someone that needs one or for your own portfolio or whatever, you're going to have a choice. Do I want to use Bootstrap or do I want to code it myself? And you can make that decision. The last thing I'll say is the reason I include Bootstrap is not necessarily because of Bootstrap itself. It's because it gets at a really important concept in web development, and that is the idea of using libraries or frameworks, they're sometimes called. So Bootstrap is one example. It is really popular, has been really popular for like 15 years, but it's definitely not the only one. So there's a sort of a newer one called Tailwind. That's sort of the current like popular one. And it's the same idea. You are customizing your HTML with classes that this library styles for you. And Tailwind is, again, really popular. It's a little different than Bootstrap in that it's pretty granular. So rather than having a style that's like, this is a card or this is an accordion, they'll have like pretty um, like granular options like let's see, like text 2XL font medium. So you kind of have to build things from smaller pieces. But the idea of this is a library that gives you stuff that you can use, that is very popular. Another really popular library is called React. This is a little different in that this is more about like data, but this is another extremely popular JavaScript library, and it is one of the most commonly used things in professional web development. There are a bunch of others, but the idea is very similar to what you just learned about Bootstrap. You load the library, you look at the library's documentation, and then you get that working in your page and rinse and repeat. Okay, so that is Bootstrap. The next video is going to be sort of a project that we work on and sort of use all of this. But for now, hopefully those foundational concepts will get you pretty far in that you can look for components and different layout options and get them working in your page. So for now, I'll say thank you for watching. And as always, of course, happy coding in Bootstrap. Sure, that works. Happy coding.